We're going back to May 1980, and I was a young navigator on an Argus crew based out of Summerside, Prince Edward Island. We had been deployed to the Azores. The station is called Lodges in the Azores, where we had flown 4 anti-submarine patrols. These are about 14.5-hour patrols out of Lodges. And on the 4th one, on the 9th of May, we were actually returning home to Summerside. So on the 9th of May, 1980, we were doing our final anti-submarine patrol. Once we had finished our tracking of a Russian nuclear submarine for about 6 hours, we were transiting home. And during that transit, a single member of our crew, our flight engineer, also the one who was the hardest of hearing, picked up a very faint ELT signal, which is an emergency locator transmitter signal. So continuing on, we said, well, we've got to do something about this. So we did a 180 turn, went back down our corrected track, and pretty soon, all of the crew actually heard this ELT going on. We descended. We got more signal analysis of it. We got a direction point. Then the Homer came on, and we wound up flying right over a single-man raft in the middle of the Atlantic. And a flare came up. So not only was it an ELT going off on this dinghy, single-man raft, but there was somebody alive in it, and that really caught us by surprise. About the size of my desktop right here. And so it just fits one person only, and that's all. So you are squeezed and hunched up in this, and we just happened to fly by within reception range. See, we didn't fly high at high altitude on the Argus because it was an unpressurized airplane, so we're at 5,000 feet. So the detection range for an ELT would be actually not very far. So he was one very, very lucky guy that we had just happened to fly by that region. What happened then was we went into a full recovery mode. Now, we had been a covert mission prior to this. Well, once you turn into search and rescue mission, now it's fully overt, and we had to inform our controlling authority that we were actually conducting a rescue. So what we did is we turned on our radar, found a ship very luckily within 20 miles, and then wound up vectoring the ship back towards where the survivor was. Now the survivor, we had set in a series of smoke flares in a circle around him, and then directed the ship in to that circle, and they wound up picking him up. It was a Spanish cargo ship on its way to Sydney, Cape Breton, for a load of coal, which I didn't find out until just a few months ago. And the conditions, the sea state was okay, but the swell was enormous. Think 20, 30-foot swells. And also, as we vectored the ship in, dusk fell. So by the time the ship got up to the survivor, like I say, he was illuminated by these flares that they could see at night. They had some difficulty in maneuvering with actually very good seamanship, so they could pick him up. It was interesting because we were transiting back, so it was fairly relaxed. The guys were eating after a long trip, and when this happened, we just jumped to action stations, and we were ready to actually blow off our lower hatch to send down a big raft to him, because we always carried what was called an MA1 gear, man overboard 1 gear, and which is a 10-man raft. That actually wouldn't have helped him because he was quite hypothermic, as it turned out. But as far as excitement, oh boy, we were really pumped, and especially when we got the ship to come in, and we found out eventually that they had hoisted him on board. Well, we were really pumped. We hung around the area for a little while, as long as we could for fuel, and then we diverted to St. John's, Newfoundland. Wow. We didn't have enough fuel to get home to Summerside. We got information after the fact through the Department of External Affairs 6 months later we got 6 Xerox sheets of the letter that Yves Le Cornec is his name, and that he wrote, and he told the whole story. And I remember reading it at the time, and that's why I wrote his name in my logbook here. But that was it. We never got to meet him. We debriefed it and then went home and carried on with our regular flying a couple days later. My career continued on. I continued on for another couple of years as a navigator onto a different aircraft. And then I was very fortunate in that the Air Force allowed me to cross-train to pilot. And so I was a navigator for 4.5 years and a pilot for, gosh, a lot more than that, 35 plus years. So I spent my life flying, and this rescue is by far the most memorable rescue. In fact, one of the most memorable missions I'd been on in my time in the Air Force. I wondered about him for years and years, and it wasn't until after I retired from my civil airline career that I said, you know, I'm going to write down this story, and I'm going to try and find this guy. I knew that he was a famous French sailor, that he had sailed around the world and things like that. But with the help of a friend, I did track him down to France. And so in the October of 2023, my wife and I were in France on holidays, and I said, well, we're going to go and find this guy. And we did. And it was actually a wonderful reunion. Once I got the email address, I emailed him. And then a couple days later, I got a very emotional response back saying, basically, I cannot believe that you're contacting me 41 years later, or how long it was. And two very lovely letters from Yves, basically saying, you know, there I was. I've been outside on the water for 3 nights. It was coming up to his 3rd night, I should say. And he said, I knew I was going to die. He said, you saved my life. You and the crew saved my life. And he says, I'm very grateful. So, as you can imagine. So once I got the second letter back, I said, Yves, I want to come and see you, because I need closure for this story, for my own story. And so we had plans to go to Provence that fall, and he lived quite close to there. So we into Provence area, and we went down, and in the time frame that we flew down, he actually moved up to Brittany. So once we had a week of holidays with friends in Provence, we took the train up to a place called Trinité-sur-Mer, where he now lives, where he had grown up, learned to sail solo across the Atlantic as a 19-year-old, and then we got together and just sort of caught up on our careers, on 40 years of me flying and for him sailing. We got off the train in a town called Oreuil, and Yves was waiting in a rent-a-car for us outside the terminal, and I just looked around and said, that's got to be him. And it was a little tentative initially, you know, hi, this is me, you know, et cetera, and you know, you don't know if the personalities are going to get along, but it just worked out perfectly. He turned out to be an absolute prince of a man. So Yves told me that he had been sailing from Boston back to his home in Trinité-sur-Mer in a borrowed trimaran, and whatever night it was, maybe 3rd or 4th or 5th night, he got caught in some bad weather, and he was up on the bow of this trimaran reducing the sail when he said he felt this huge shape coming over him. It was a wave, as it turned out, and it flipped the trimaran right on its back. As he went over, he hung onto the guide wires. Of course, bang, down he went into the water. He crawled back onto the boat. Remember, it's pitch black now, and he hung onto the centerboard for the entire night, just until there was enough light to see what he could do afterwards, you know, in the morning. So Yves told me how he got his raft out. The next morning, When it was light enough, he took off his clothes, tied them to the center board, dove down into the water. This is North Atlantic water now. He said the cold was paralyzing, but underneath it's all dark. And so through the wires and lines and that, he got himself into the cabin, which is pitch black, found a flashlight, he found a bottle of water, a little bit of food, his raft, and his emergency locator transmitter. And with those, he got them outside, inflated the raft, and got himself dressed up again. He said it was just a terrible situation. Got into the raft, and interestingly, the trimaran did not sink. In fact, it washed up on the shores of the Orkney Islands a year later, because they found it. Of course, there's a registration number there. But he got into the raft. He said water washed over him for a complete day. He said it was just horrible, the cold. But he turned on his ELT. That's all that he had. Okay, so he's off the shipping lanes. He's in a random part of the ocean, and we picked up his ELT 2 days later, which it only has a 48-hour battery in it, and it actually should have run out by then. If it had not been for the ELT, we would have never found him, because even at 5,500 feet, that's not very high, but the size of his raft would have been about 1/10 of a grain of sand. Even though it was orange, and even when we flew over it at 300 feet, it wasn't very big. So my wife and I spent 2 days with him, and she very graciously gave us a lot of space, and there were times when each of us had choked up. Because as he said there, he was on his raft and he was coming up to the third night. He knew he was going to die, and he said he was sad. He said he wasn't scared, but he said he was sad that he was going to miss his friends, or his friends would miss him and his family would miss him. But he said, he'd sort of made his peace. But as when we got together, it was just pure joy that he had survived. He'd had this wonderful sailing career. And of course, I had my long flying career. And we compared notes the whole time. And it was interesting. You couldn't get farther apart, sailing and flying, but the parallels were actually many. We spent 2 days together, had a wonderful time along the coast of Brittany there. When it came time to say goodbye, there was some real sadness there. But I think we both felt very enriched by the reunion. And and we've kept in touch since then as well. During our time there, Yves called up a reporter from the French newspaper called West France, which is the biggest circulation paper in France. And the reporter came out, and he absolutely loved the story. Yves Le Cornec is actually from that area and is quite famous. And so there he was in the newspapers again. And the French reporter thought this was just a fantastic story. Over the years, I often thought of Yves and just wondered, how on earth did that work out for him in the end? Well, as it turns out, he has sailed across the Atlantic 29 times, 9 times solo. First, he still has the record for the youngest solo sailing crossing of the Atlantic, still at 19. And he did 2 round-the-world Whitbread sailing races. He's got a real pedigree when it comes to sailing. Okay, so was it a fluke? Was it just bare-arsed luck? Was it divine intervention? Maybe all of those things. But I'll tell you, it sure put a smile on our dials. So when we found him, we were absolutely thrilled. And especially that we helped orchestrate the rescue. So can you just point out where you think you capsized?
Capsized somewhere around here, I think.
Okay.
So you see you got the Labrador current coming down there and the Gulf Stream coming down. And this is a nice, nasty area there because of the both Labrador and Gulf Stream meeting there. And it can make huge pyramidal waves there, and that's probably what happened, because I have the memory that night I was in front of the boat changing sail. It was really a big storm, really stormy. And suddenly I was there up front the boat, changing my sail or whatsoever. And suddenly I wouldn't hear the wind anymore. And looking up, I saw just something black. I couldn't see the sky or whatever. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, and it was black. And it was probably a huge wave. I couldn't see it because it was dark night. But and then I felt the boat was lifting up like this, and I had to grasp at the pulpit up there, and the boat went on me like this, you know.
Holy smokes.